It is behind enemy lines time. That's right. The San Francisco 49ers are about to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I, even though I live in Tampa, am going to Santa Clara to watch the game in person. We'll get into that a little bit more later. But I've got a very, very special guest. Maybe some of you recognize him, maybe some of you don't, but we're going to give the backstory and we're going to talk all about the Bucs and 49ers next. All right, welcome back to Last Second Sports, where we are giving you our take down to the last second. And as I said, it is Behind Enemy Lines night. And I got a very, very special guest with me tonight, Mr. Ben Meyerson, who now covers the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And for those of you that have been around long enough, you would recognize Ben. Ben not only has done shows with myself, he used to be a regular caller on the Cone phone and has worked with Grant Cone, wrote for him on SI, is a 49er fan, but professionally covers the Tampa Bay Buccaneers locally here in Tampa. It is the perfect guest because he knows both teams inside and out. Ben, fantastic having you on, man. How you been?
Yeah, Jesse, we were talking before the show. This is kind of a full circle moment. I remember the first time I went on anyone's channel that wasn't Grant's. It was your channel. I think you brought me, Ben Camperman, I want to say,
Yep.
and we had one more in there where it was kind of a cone phone conglomerate of guests. So yeah, this is a really full circle moment for me. This past year, I've been doing some work covering the Buccaneers for SI as well. So yeah, man, excited to get into this all, but really just happy to be back. These are the two teams I know the best in the NFL. Like you said, I'm a 49ers fan, and I've been covering the Buccaneers, and I've been a Florida resident my whole life, so I'm pretty familiar with the Bucs.
Absolutely, man. Well, I can't wait to get into it. Let's start, by the way, with I think an underrated aspect of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that is their defense. I think anybody that's been paying attention has noticed that they've been holding down some good offenses to pretty low scoring points. Outside of a couple weeks ago against the Texans, it got a little crazy. That game turned into a shootout, but they also had a ton of injuries to the secondary, I know, in that game. Talk to me a little bit about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses about that team and what we can expect from them.
Yeah, I think this Todd Bowles run defense since 2019, right? I think people, I got to remind people that he's been there as the defensive coordinator. Now he's the head coach, of course. But they've been the number one rushing defense in the league since Todd Bowles took over with this unit. So this unit has been really, really good against the run, been a little spottier against the pass, defending some quarterbacks. So, in terms of what this defense is going to look like versus the 49ers, I think they'll do a good job against the run. That they've shown to do that. Even in their struggles, they've just been really consistent against the run this year. But we'll get into some of the players that we'll be looking at in some of those matchups. They have some weaknesses on the outside with Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis. Kind of, those guys are names people know, but they're having the worst year of both their careers, right? So both starting outside corners for the Buccaneers. But then behind them, Antoine Winfield is having an all-pro year. He's playing like a stud right now. So there's a lot of interesting things with this defense. They're kind of a mix of the future and the past. They kind of have guys like Levante David, right, who's sort of like, I would compare him to George Kittle for the 49ers, right? Not quite at the peak of his powers, but still a very good football player.
Mm-hmm.
And they also got Devin White, who's in a contract year, is looking really, really good. Then they have Vita Vea up the middle. So they have some interesting players. But we'll get into the matchups later on and what that's going to look like. I think this 49ers team is going to be able to exploit some of those weaknesses.
Yeah, the secondary is actually pretty dang good. I know the back half of that defense has been decent. A lot of injuries, but looking at Tampa Bay over the course of the last few years, there's been a lot of turnover in the secondary, but somehow they've stayed relatively competitive. As far as health goes, I know that like Carlton Davis and some of those other guys have been in and out. What does it look like health wise? You have any idea? They've been in
Yeah, so
practice.
in terms of health wise, we'll definitely get a better idea. Carlton Davis did not play last week, so I think if you ask Buccaneers fans, though, they would actually say that was kind of a benefit for them because he got torched versus Houston. He
Yeah.
let up 3 touchdowns, so Davis is going to be the big one we're watching this week. They've also just had some kind of ticky tacky injuries along the defensive line. They haven't had a game this year where they've had every single one of those guys. Kalijah Cansey, their first round pick, missed a lot at the beginning of the year. He's been playing lately. Vita Vea, though, has missed some games lately. He did play last game, but still banged up. So this defensive unit is like I said, kind of a mismatch, right? Some younger guys who are up and coming, and you still want to see more out of, and then some older guys like Shaq Barrett, who's still pretty consistent, even though he's not that Bosa guy or Myles Garrett or anything like that, but he's certainly a really quality edge rusher for the Bucs. So the secondary has been good at times, but I actually
Good-ish. Yeah.
good-ish. I think I don't want to tip off my matchups too early.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think Brandon Ayuk has looked really good, and he's going to look really good in this game.
What talk to me a little bit about McCollum. This is just more of like a personal thing because I liked McCollum a lot coming out of the draft a couple years ago, just because I knew he was going to be drafted super late, and he has the same mold of the corner that ended up in Seattle. His name's slipping my mind a little bit, but they were both big guys, both ran extremely fast 40s. McCollum hasn't had quite the career that he has, but overall, I mean, I think that he's starting to come into his own a little bit. He's starting to get some playing time. What are the thoughts around the locker room, do you think, with McCollum and how he's been playing and kind of growing into being a corner in the NFL?
Well, and that's exactly what I was referring to earlier with Carlton Davis. With him
Mhm.
being out, that's who steps in for Carlton Davis
Yeah.
or Jamel Dean, who Jamel Dean and Davis have both missed games these last month or so. So Zion McCollum has stepped in. He's been better than both of those guys. Quite frankly, those guys just have not been good enough this year. So yeah, he's looked really, really good for them. I wouldn't put him as a high end guy, but he certainly raises the floor of that unit when he's been playing. But then, Todd Bowles has been pretty stubborn about leaving certain starters. And Ryan Neal, in specific, a guy who kind of came from Seattle, who just has not been good for this football team, has been kind of the Achilles heel of the secondary. He's kept him in for the most part. This last game was the first game they started benching Ryan Neal some. But even then, with the media, they're not really going to know what to expect coming into the game. It'll be kind of, what does Todd Bowles think about this matchup? So I'm really curious to see how Todd Bowles approaches the 49ers, given, how many guys they're going to put with McCaffrey, Kittle, Debo that they can put in the backfield, in the slot, with all the different things they can do, kind of playing positionless football. The thought process would be that, hey, Zion McCollum would fit in really well. He's a fast guy. He can maybe keep up and do better in some of those cross matchups that they'll see. But then Todd Bowles has just been kind of a really stubborn, old school head coach. So, from the Tampa perspective, we don't really know what to quite expect. And it's more been about us kind of waiting to see, okay, when is the switch going to get flipped here? When are they going to decide to go to these younger guys, take Ryan Neal off the field, take Davis or Dean off the field? I think Davis and Dean are less likely. Ryan Neal is the guy more so that probably going to see the lineup change this week. But if Davis or Dean misses the game, Zion McCollum's going to step in and he's going to be that guy.
Do you think there's any scenario where Todd Bowles loses his job? And the only reason that I ask is because maybe he's looking at it from a perspective like, hey, I've got 1 year here. I'm just going to play who I'm comfortable with. Because I don't, I mean, at least from the outside looking in, I don't get the feeling that he is in any jeopardy of losing his job, but maybe I'm wrong with that.
I really think it depends on how the rest of this year goes. I will say before last week's win against the Titans in Tampa, the discussion in the media room was the fact that, the owners of the Buccaneers had never fired a coach in season. So that's certainly what we were talking about. The Bucs had lost 4 straight at that point. And, I don't ever think there was an expectation that firing would come in season, but I do think there is the feeling around this team that is sort of a lame duck situation where, sure, you can justify bringing Todd Bowles back. You can look at this and say, hey, this defense has been good. Their salary cap kind of totally screwed over the roster this year with Brady, and what went on with their center position with Ryan Jensen. Just a lot of bad luck in terms of how things have gone. And they always knew that this was going to be a year where you take a step back. But I do think, the Glazers, while they have been more patient, that's the owners of the Buccaneers, they have been more patient than other owners in getting rid of guys. At the same time, Todd Bowles just isn't a head coach for the future. He's a really great defensive coordinator. He's an awesome defensive coordinator. In fact, he'd be really awesome as the 49ers defensive coordinator right now. But I think he's just in a situation where it's kind of a no-win for him, to where maybe next year they draft a quarterback, do something to inject this franchise with something different. But if he doesn't get fired at the end of this year, I don't see how he makes it beyond the next 2 years, just because this is an offensive league and he is a really conservative head coach. If you look at defensive coaches who have come in and been successful recently, it's not because they're really conservative and, really hold their cards to their chest and do all the things that Todd Bowles does, is kind of that old school guy. So I think in terms of, those aspects on the football field, that's Todd Bowles. I just don't know how much longer you can really justify keeping him around beyond the next 2 years. But I will say, I think it's definitely not comparable to like Josh McDaniels, where the culture is such a problem and all that. The culture is good in Tampa Bay. The locker room is in good shape. The players believe in Todd Bowles, and quite honestly, people see Todd Bowles in his press conferences or don't, because he's not that interesting, but he's a really nice, he's a good dude around the organization. It's not like he's a malcontent, right? That is not the situation at all. I think it's sort of just lame duck on the field. Why would you want to move forward with this guy who just doesn't seem like he's built for the future of the NFL? Seems like he's more built for the past.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Get to a couple of these super chats here. Gammon says, Mitchell and Ness, speaking from experience. Oh, it looks like there's something going on in the chat. I'll have to catch this one later. Sometimes that's a show all in itself. He says, speaking from experience here, I've absolutely verbally blasted the host multiple years here at different times. Never had an issue. Hell, even applied for a job. Zero hard feelings. Look inward, friend. Maybe somebody got banned, or I don't know. Wasn't by me if it happened. Brother Bob says, haha, I'm here, damn it. Sorry, Ben, you're losing Sunday. Joke's on you, Brother Bob. Yeah. And this tells me you're late. Ben is actually a 49er fan who happens to cover the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, living in Tampa, went to school to be a journalist, covers Florida State and covers the Buccaneers, but he is actually a 49er fan. So you can't really get at him like you do my normal guest. Sorry, man. Sorry.
I win either way, Jesse, this weekend. Either the Buccaneers become relevant enough that people start paying more, attention to them, or my favorite team wins. So I'm cool either way this weekend.
Brother Bob says, Ben, how much you losing by this weekend? See, there you go. Too late. It's too late. It's not going to happen. Not this week. He is one of us. So that's the way that it works. Oh, look at, here we go. Here we go. Raymond Martinez says there's Raymond. An OG. Yeah, absolutely. What's up, Raymond? Yeah. What's up, Chad? Appreciate you. Okay, let's get on to the next one here. Let's talk about Baker's career resurgence. I'll tell you this. I was never a fan of Baker Mayfield coming out of the draft. I just never really saw what maybe the Cleveland Browns saw in him and some other franchises saw in him. But I got to give him a little bit of credit. I mean, he went to the Rams late last year, played well down the stretch, and now has come to Tampa and has played well here. Heck, the question even came up in the chat, and I wish I would have saved it, but somebody asked, has Baker been better this year than Tom Brady was last year? And I don't think it's that far-fetched to say that. I know it sounds crazy, but Tom was very skittish down the stretch. He was unwilling to take contact. That much was clear. It did come out after he retired saying, hey, I don't want to take contact anymore. And I was like, yeah, that was pretty obvious watching you play. Now, the numbers from Tom were incredible, but if you watch the games, there was a lot of missed throws, a lot of meat left on the bone because he was just unwilling to step up. that's neither here nor there. But Baker Mayfield has had a bit of a career resurgence, and it seems like he has galvanized this locker room a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about Baker and what he's meant for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Well, he has certainly galvanized the locker room. It did have a lame duck sort of feeling going into the year, but
For sure.
Baker, to his credit, has come in and been the ultimate professional. Which I don't think people really think of that when they think Baker Mayfield, but I think he's kind of proven that notion wrong over the last 2 years. He's had, the whole story with him was that he had, I want to say, 7 or so different offensive coordinators over 6 years between the two teams last year. The Browns switching so much with his career now. Dave Canales, who spent, I want to say 13, 12 years with the Seattle Seahawks before he became the Buccaneers offensive coordinator this past year. So,
very Alex Smith, really, if you think about it. Yeah.
Definitely. A guy like you, definitely that's a great comparison. A guy who's kind of come in a little bit of a letdown, but has had some career resurgence. I think Baker we know who he is at this point in his career, but he's playing to the best version of that, to his credit, right? He's done a really good job of not getting sacked this year. It's one of the lowest pressure to sack rates of his career. At least compared to the last 3 years, it was a major, major difference in terms of how much he's getting sacked. Baker, to his credit, hasn't done any advertisements. One of the commenters just pointed that out. He's kind of taken himself out of limelight. And no, this locker room absolutely believes in Baker Mayfield. I think the best way to describe the situation is that Baker's not the solution to the problem at quarterback. But he's certainly not a problem for them, right? He's kind of just a middle of the road quarterback, that bridge guy until the Buccaneers find that player of the future. And I do think the Buccaneers expect Baker Mayfield to be there next year for them to draft a young guy and to kind of get things going. Yeah, that's this Ben Meyerson. But no, Baker's been really good, for who he is, right? He hasn't been putting the ball in harm's way, even though he has had, like, I want to say 5 picks over the last 7 games. If you look at those interceptions, a lot of those you can kind of justify them in the sense that they were in later game situations, or when they were down multiple scores, or I think you can really only point to one or two of those where you can say, hey, that was a bad decision, or he made a bad throw. So he's done a much better job protecting the football and just been a lot smarter about the fact that if the Buccaneers are going to win games, it's not going to be because of him, but he can be the reason they can lose games, right? So I think he's just played a really good brand of football this year, to where he's finding Mike Evans a lot. He's finding Chris Godwin a lot. They're finally getting Rachaad White involved in the screen game and out of the backfield. So I think he's done a better job with those weapons, because they are pretty good weapons. But there is a ceiling to this offense, and we've seen that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting. I don't think I have it actually as a topic here. Let me see if I've got it. Okay, I don't. So Mike Evans, and I'm sure that he's going to come up later when we talk matchups, but just overall, I thought, first of all, Mike Evans is one of the most underrated players, I think, of all time. It's funny because a lot of people are really going in on how good Keenan Allen has been, and he's been marvelous this year. Nothing against Keenan Allen. He's been fantastic. But a lot of people look at him as a much older receiver, and he's doing as great as he is. Evans falls into that same mold, and Evans has 1,000 yards every single year without fail. By the time it's all said and done, he's going to have a career that boasts one of the most 1,000-yard seasons out of all receivers that have ever played in it. He's a phenomenal player, and a little bit different than Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen wins a lot with route running and just being crafty at the line. Mike Evans wins with speed and his size, and the speed hasn't gone anywhere at 30 years old. I actually thought there was a chance before the season started that he was going to get traded. I know that was a big talk there. Why do you think he ended up staying? And do you think that is more of, hey, he's going to play out the rest of the year and be gone at the end of this year? Or do you think there's a chance that he finishes his career in Tampa?
It'd be hard for the Buccaneers fans to think of a way where he doesn't finish his career in Tampa. Mm-hmm. And that's really a big part of the reason why he wasn't ultimately traded away was, I think this team understood where they were. But they didn't look at this year as, hey, we got to get our quarterback of the future. They looked at this year as, hey, we need to reestablish the culture of this franchise, right? Tom Brady moving on. That doesn't mean that the franchise should fall apart. They still have a lot of good football players on this team. So I think Mike Evans was a big part of that. And that's why they kept him around, is for that culture. He is so important to this community. He's been in Tampa since 2013. You know, he's the most iconic player in the last 15 years for the Buccaneers, even with Tom Brady. So, you know, I think he's a fan favorite. He's so consistent. He's so good. You know, he had 1 or 2 drops last week, right? But even then, that's kind of just who Mike Evans is. He'll have a drop every now and then, you know, that you would like to see him get. But for the most part, he's catching, you know, the balls he needs to catch. He's doing a really good job of, you know, using his speed, using his size, like you mentioned, his physical attributes. He knows how to win at the NFL level in such a consistent way that, you know, I think he kind of gets undervalued because, you know, like you said, maybe he doesn't have Justin Herbert throwing him a ball. He doesn't have the flashy offense around them, and Tampa's kind of in the lame duck situation overall. But, you know, Mike Evans is still that dude that he was 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. But Mike Evans to me is one of those receivers that I don't think he's going to go down in history with as much love as Larry Fitzgerald, but very similar to Fitzgerald in the fact that maybe once or twice was a top 3 receiver in the league, but for the most part hovered in that top 10, usually towards the back half of the top 10, and was just always there and always effective. I think he's very similar in that manner. So we'll see where he finishes his career, but he'll make a difference if he goes somewhere else. And obviously, if he stays in Tampa, I'm sure that Tampa fans would love to see him stick around. So Brother Bob says he's been bamboozled. Damn, you got me, Ben. Damn it. Yeah, he really does. He razzes everybody that I bring on and talks a lot of trash, and it just doesn't work this week. Sorry, man. Fish and Chip says, Jesse, please tell me you're not a Bears fan. Laugh out loud. Not a Bears fan. Definitely not a Bears fan. CB Niner says, from Cone Phone to Bucs Insider, congrats. And the hair.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He notices. He notices the hair. Gammon says, "Not gonna lie, we have the leash and will be dog walking the Bucs, trying to get amped and hyped for the game, but motivated Bosa is like watching a burial. To be honest, I'm with you. The only reason I'm motivated for the game is I'm going to be there. So that's motivating in itself. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a day trip for me, so I'm looking forward to it." And then Brother Bob comes back and says, Ben, screw the Bucs. Do you like Wilkes on the sideline? Hey, this is a good question.
I mean, come on, man. This is like the most overblown thing. I mean, the 49ers.
Thank you.
I have an old tweet where I said the 49ers are the ultimate, or something along the lines of, the 49ers are nonstop content machine. And this is the exact stuff I'm talking about, is they always do this kind of stuff all throughout the year. I mean, you know, Brand Ayuk's in the doghouse, which sure he was. But, I mean, ultimately, it's like all these little things that don't really matter by the end of the year. And I think this is another one of those things. I think fans just kind of cling on to certain things, man. And I think as a fan, especially going from being a fan in the NFL, getting to, you know, go to practices, go to a lot of different media events and get a better sense of what things are like behind the scenes. NFL teams know exactly what they're doing in terms of the PR they're putting out, the things that they're doing that they know fans are going to be talking about. And I think no team plays their fans better than the 49ers. And I'll leave it at that.
It's entertainment, really. That's what the NFL is ultimately it's supposed to be entertainment, and they do a hell of a job of entertaining. Most certainly. I think you said it very, very well. Let's talk about the Buccaneers, though. I know that we talked about some of the great players on the team, some of the higher profile players on the team. Mentioned maybe a couple guys that a lot of people wouldn't know, like McCollum, and maybe he's on this list. But, you know, I always like to ask, give me a player that's on the rise or maybe is older but is resurrected his career, a player that most people outside of Bucs fans most likely aren't going to know who this player is or a lot about them. Who is that player that we should know? for the
Yeah,
Bucs.
absolutely. I know people are familiar with this name, but it doesn't really get talked about enough from a national perspective. The move that Luke Gadecki has made from going from left guard to right tackle. They put Tristan Wirfs from right tackle to left tackle for this reason. And Luke Gadecki has been one of the better pass blocking right tackles in the NFL. So this run unit is awful. Like they're not bad, they're terrible. But this pass blocking unit has been really good this year, and Gadecki has been a big reason for that. I think Gadecki is the guy that they'll try and target, obviously, because you have Tristan Wirfs on the other side, but he's no slouch, and I don't think he might have some moments against Young and Bosa, but I don't think Young and Bosa are going to eat the same way they did against Jacksonville. I think they'll have a harder time at least finishing and getting sacks on plays. So Gadecki is a guy who I think should get a lot more credit. And then the Buccaneers have an undrafted free agent starting at nickel corner, Christian Izien. And he's not the greatest nickel corner ever, but he's certainly better than what the 49ers have had over the last few weeks and the start of this season. So he's a pretty damn good football player, Izien. Like I said, an undrafted guy, really an unheralded guy. And I think he's going to look good in this matchup. He's been pretty good all season. I would say he's about average, above average, but considering he's undrafted guy who the Buccaneers had plenty of free agents they brought in to try and supplant that nickel position, and he came in and really took that job. So I was really impressed with him. And then, I know people know this name, but I want to throw this out there as well. Rachaad White has kind of had a resurgence over this last month of the season.
Yes.
106 scrimmage yards per game over the last 4 games. Throughout the start of the season, he had 1 game over 80 yards in terms of scrimmage yards. So they've been figuring out how to get him the football. And I still think, we'll get into the matchups more. Buccaneers are going to try and run the ball down the middle. It's not going to go well. But they've done a really good job getting him in space, getting him involved in the screen game, finding different ways to get him the football because, really outside of Evans and Godwin, they just don't really have offensive playmakers. So Rachaad White has really been that guy. And I know people know him because of fantasy football, but he's certainly become a really, really good football player for this team. And running back 2, Jesse, do you know who running back 2 is for the Buccaneers?
I do know who it is, and oh my God, dude.
But this is my point exactly. It's not like there's really
it's not a household name. It's
Chase Edmonds.
There we go. Okay. I was like, I know he played for Arizona. I know who this is. I just couldn't remember his name. But it's point well received.
It's Chase Edmonds. So, this while they have some playmakers, and one more guy. I know I mentioned quite a few guys.
No, I love this.
Trey Palmer. He's been that 3rd receiver for the Buccaneers. He's been really good. He's a rookie. I want to say 5th round pick. Mm-hmm. He's just been more and more involved in the offense, especially as they've been kind of struggling to get tight ends involved and other pass catchers. So, I think there's a lot of guys over these last 2 drafts for the Buccaneers on both sides of the ball that have come in and played really quality football. Maybe not, star level or Pro Bowl level, but guys who are certainly raising the floor of this team.
Yeah, I mean, teams are not made up of mostly stars. They're made up of guys just like this that are fighting for a chance to make a team. They do so. They make an impact a few games a year, and then the rest of it, of course, is around your stars. I love hearing stories of guys like this. And I will say this, just on a personal note, that I went to the preseason game against the Ravens. You hit me up while I was there. But my son is a Ravens fan, and Rachaad White is one of the nicest guys in the world. He took so much time signing signatures, signed for even my son who's wearing a Ravens jersey, like the nicest guy you could run into. I was very impressed with him as a person. Oh, actually, and another player that I wanted to talk about who I liked a little bit coming out of the draft, player from Louisville, and I think he's starting to get more run as the season's gone on. Also very, very generous with his time when I was at the game is Yaya. Talk to me a little bit about him.
Yeah, he's come in and been really good. They drafted Joe Tryon a few years ago at the end of the 1st round after that Super Bowl. He's kind of just been a sort of, I don't want to say a bust because that's not the right way to describe it. He's just a rotation player for the Buccaneers. He's not really a splash guy. But Yaya Diaby has come in and had some really good moments. I think he's still a developing player. I would say, I still want to see him be more consistent, but he's certainly one of those guys that you see the flashes out of him, right? You see him starting to show those plays to where he can be a consistent starter in the future. I don't think he's going to ever be a high-end rusher, but I think he can be sort of a fringe Pro Bowl guy in the next few years. So I think he's a quality football player for the Buccaneers. But that's kind of a lot of these guys we've been talking about, guys who are sort of fringe where they're above the average of the league or right around there, but they're not quite those upper sort of echelon guys. So yeah, no, Yaya Diaby, a really good name. Glad to hear about
Great name.
Great name. But glad to hear about Rashad White as well. He's really good to us in the locker room as well. Another moment I kind of just want to shout out, this is definitely involving a former 49er, was Azeez Al-Shaair had this mic'd up moment that went viral. I retweeted it on my Twitter. I think it's literally the last thing I retweeted, where Yaya Diaby grew up in the Tampa Bay area. The game, the Titans were playing the Bucs last weekend, and the game was in Tampa. And Azeez grew up homeless in the area. And he talked to Mike Evans about how, he was a kid growing up in the area. He really looked up to Mike, and just, getting to play against him was kind of like a dream come true. And Mike and him had a really, really nice moment. So, it's those kind of stories that you really like to see in the NFL. It's just cool human stories, So that was a really cool moment. Definitely go check that out. Search it up on Twitter. It's a great clip.
Yeah, it is. I actually saw it a couple hours before the show went live, and it was definitely one of those like heart-touching moments. And Azeez being an ex-49er as well, it was just cool. I didn't know that about Azeez. I didn't know that he grew up homeless. Those are stories that sometimes don't get out.
Yeah.
And maybe it is a well-known thing, and I just somehow missed it. But shout out to him, man. That was a really cool moment with him and Mike Evans.
Yeah, I don't think it's as well known. I think it's been told before and it's came up, but
we know about Kinlaw and his situation with
Yes.
homelessness and stuff, but I didn't know about Azeez until that came out.
No, Azeez is a cool story. I would definitely, if I'm a fan, I would take some time to look up his Wikipedia, look up his background. He's got a really cool story, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother Bob says, "All right, Ben, screw the Buckies. Are you confident in Moody?"
Oh, geez. Well, no. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Doesn't ever make sense to draft a kicker in any round ever. I actually think punters are more consistent to draft than kickers are right now, just because there's so much pressure on the kicker position. It's just one of those things. You're either really good at it or you're not. And I'm not saying Moody is terrible, but it doesn't really make sense when you're in the position the 49ers are to go and get a rookie kicker who's a guy who could be going for game-winning, game-time kicks in the playoffs and gotta-have-it situations. So, no, I'm not confident in Jake Moody. I mean, I'd like to be, but no, definitely not.
And then he has another question for you. He goes, "Ben, serious question. Do you think Purdy is better than Herbert?" And then he covers his eyes. He knows he just dropped a bombshell for the chat on this one.
Yeah, no. No, I mean, no. I mean, I don't know where to start with this one. Justin Herbert is top 4 to 5 guy. I mean, I know people like trashing on him and Josh Allen right now because their teams aren't winning, and I mean, Josh is getting some deserved criticism. I think it's a little overblown, but I think like everyone, I had all kinds of buddies texting me, "Oh, Trevor Lawrence is terrible. He's all this and that." It's like, come on, guys. This is one game sample size. Don't be so week to week in this league. No, yeah, Justin Herbert. I mean, come on. I don't even know how to address that question seriously.
All right, let's get on to the next one, man. He says, he had another one. I'll hold it actually. Let's get into the next one. So, matchups favoring the San Francisco 49ers. I have a feeling this list might be a little bit longer than the next list, but I do think there are some things that favor Tampa as well. But just looking at this one on paper, you can go anywhere you want with this one, Ben. What matchups do you think favor the San Francisco 49ers?
Yeah, so I got 3 matchups, and I think there's more, but 3 that really favor the 49ers. The first one is going to be Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel versus these two corners. These corners are having career worst years. Jamal Dean and Carlton Davis, career worst passer rating, completion percentage allowed. I want to say yards per reception. They're either worst or second worst in the 5 or 6 years of both their careers. So yeah, I mean, no, Carlton Davis, I don't know how else to say it. He got cooked versus the Texans, like cooked. And I think Ayuk is going to have himself a day in specific. I'm kind of curious to see how Deebo gets used against this team. I think he'll probably be more of sort of an illusion sort of guy. They'll use him to get other players out in space like McCaffrey and Kittle and Ayuk. But no, I think if Brandon Ayuk doesn't have a good game, it's because Brock Purdy is having issues, not because Brandon Ayuk is having issues. So I think that's the first matchup that kind of sticks out to me. Is that one you had written down, Jesse?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, against second. Now, I will say this: Antoine Winfield, safety, one of the better safeties in the league this year. He's having a hell of a year, all pro year.
Yeah,
very, very good safety. The corners have been a little bit iffy. Like I said, I do like McCollum, but yeah, definitely a matchup that I think certainly favors the San Francisco 49ers for sure. I'll give you another one that I think favors the San Francisco 49ers. I think I think the 49ers, and I know that it's been talked about a ton here, okay? But the 49ers run defense is not as bad as people want to make it out to be. And Tampa Bay, as you said, is absolutely awful in the run game. You called it terrible, in fact.
Yeah.
The 49ers defense is going to win that matchup hands down against the Buccaneers run.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes to the coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Dave Canales, who spent 12 years in Seattle, was a quarterbacks coach, was the I want to say pass game coordinator for a few years. He was, people credit him mostly with the Geno resurgence or being a part of that at least. But he kind of does this Seattle thing where the Buccaneers are terrible up the middle, running the ball between the tackles, and they're going to do it about 10 to 15 times this game. For what reason, I don't know. But the Buccaneers are 32nd in rush EPA per play. Over the last few weeks, even when their offense has been better, it's kind of the best stretch they've been in. They're still like 24th in rush EPA per play. Even over the last 4 or 5 weeks, it's 29th. Like they're the worst running offense in the league right now. It's not even close. And Rachaad White isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is that their interior of their offensive line is kind of just a mess. They had Ryan Jensen, who had a terrible knee injury, right?
Yeah.
He came back for the playoff game last year, but missed in the entirety of the regular season. We saw him during training camp here and there, but we always kind of didn't really know what was going on with him, right? And it seemed like a thing where maybe they're resting him one day, playing him the next, and they were doing a little bit of that. But then in the Buccaneers' final preseason game against the Ravens, it comes out at halftime, or actually, sorry, no, wasn't at halftime, but the Buccaneers GM went on the broadcast, the TV broadcast, a local one here, and said, Ryan Jensen isn't going to play this year. We're putting him on season-ending IR. I was with the beat reporters that day who covered this team for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're, I can hear them saying profanity in the media box, like really like what they had no idea what was going on with the Ryan Jensen situation. Of course
his career might be done, sadly, right? Like that's not normal,
No, it's not. I've seen him around the facility here and there. Buccaneers, each locker room has their own little game. The Buccaneers have chess, so you see him playing chess every now and then. But even then, I want to say I haven't seen him in the last month and a half at the facility. It's just kind of really sad situation.
Reminds me of kind of the Weston Richburg situation with the San Francisco 49ers a couple years ago. So.
Yeah, but I would say even more extreme than that. Ryan Jensen.
Oh, Jensen's a way better player. Way better player. Yeah.
Even in terms of injury and impact and all that too, because Ryan Jensen, of course, we know what happened with Weston Richburg, but Ryan Jensen, he came to the podium after that preseason game when it was announced he was going to be done, and he was in tears. Man.
Yeah.
He was shaken up. I've never seen a player that visibly shaken up. So that was a real bummer. And then, their two guard spots are just not really good. They have Aaron Stinney, who's been starting at left guard in place of Matt Filer, who's missed the last few games. But honestly, Aaron Stinney, who's like a 6th-round pick, has been better than Matt Filer has been. So that kind of tells you what you need to know. And then Cody Mock is a notable player. He's at right guard. He was a 2nd-round pick, and I'm sure you might know that name, Jesse, because he played at North Dakota State.
Yep.
He was the left tackle there, converted from tight end. So he's a project player, and he has those moments that you kind of expect to see out of those players. So that kind of led into my next point. The Buccaneers' interior offensive line is a mess. I think they're bottom 3 to 5 in the league. And I kind of hesitate from saying the worst just because I don't really know the rest of the league interior offensive linemen that well. But no, this the tackles are good on this team, but the 49ers are going to be able to win on the interior. They're going to be able to mess up this run game that the Bucs have that is awful already. I think there's some things if you're a Tampa Bay Bucs fan where you're like, hey, Cody Mock sort of looks good. And then you're like, okay, I guess, I don't know. He's still a developing player. He needs to put on more weight. Really, really a project. So yeah, this interior offensive line is awful.
Yeah, it definitely is. And yes, Wirfs is playing. He's left tackle now, not right tackle. He made that move.
Well,
made that transition this year.
He's had some injuries, so I think that's why that question came up. But he hasn't missed any time so far. He just had one moment where it looked like he was going to exit the game, but he's a tough dude.
I feel like he's always a little bit banged up. Every time it seemed like all last year he was on the injury report, but he always found a way to play. So
no, he does always find a way to play.
Brother Bob says this is probably not going to make sense to Ben at all, but he calls Larry Kruger, who's a content creator in the space as well, Purdy's pimp. So he says you're better than Purdy's pimp. We need to trade for you. You're objective. All right, fair enough. Is there any other matchups before we move on that you think favor the 49ers that we didn't talk about, or you want to get to the other side of things?
I don't know. I don't want to say it's going to favor the 49ers, but I think of course, we talked about the Bucs having a great running defense. That's going to be really fascinating for me, because McCaffrey has not had the same rushing totals that he's had over this last month compared to his last, 20 or so games with the Niners. So that to me is going to be the most fascinating matchup from 49ers versus Bucs is, Bucs run defense has been excellent. They got Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, who have been really good. And Todd Bowles just does a lot of good things in terms of mixing up fronts. I think people, in terms of defensive coordinators you talk about around the league, see a lot of guys doing different things with coverage right now, right? But Todd Bowles will give you a lot of different looks in terms of this front. So I think that's going to be a really fascinating matchup to see how Purdy deals with that, how Kyle deals with that, how they change, over the course of the game with dealing with that front. Because I don't think it's the most talented front, but they have good enough players and will do enough different things to where they can disrupt teams.
Yeah, most certainly. And then the linebackers, when they're playing at their best, I mean, that's a hell of a tandem still. I think there were times last year that I watched them like, man, these guys are just not even playing hard. I don't know what's going on. This year, it seems like they're kind of back to their old ways. They both seem very, very good this year. So who knows what's going on with them. But, the Bucs do have two very good linebackers when they're playing at their best. So.
Yeah. No. Lalonte David does a really good job against tight ends. He's more the coverage guy. And I compared him to Kittle earlier because he's kind of at that same point in their career. And then Devin White, he's in a contract year, so he's going to be playing.
He's going to ball out because last year he took his foot off the gas a lot. I was not a lot of effort coming from him on film from what I saw, but this year he seems to have it all together. And you're right. I know there was talks about him getting possibly traded as well this offseason. Obviously, that didn't happen. I'm sure a lot of teams were very interested. I think Seattle was one of the teams that was interested. So
definitely.
Thank goodness that didn't happen. Let's talk about some of the matchups favoring the Buccaneers. I know there's one that really stands out to me, but I'll let you go through yours and just let you know if, maybe I sync with that. And if not, then I'll mention it. But I don't think there's a lot of matchups that favor the Bucs, but there is one in particular that I'm like, this favors the Buccaneers for sure. What are your thoughts on this side of things?
Well, and I think we're probably going towards the same place. So I don't want to tip it off right away. I'll give one other interesting one before I get
Okay.
to that. Is I think this tackle duo, and we talked about it before. They're gonna do a better job than Jacksonville did, right? I
Yeah.
don't think they're gonna completely hold back Bosa and Chase Young and Randy Gregory and dealing with all of that. But I mean, Tristan Wirfs is a baller. He's a legit dude. He's about to get paid a lot of money. So I think that's one of the better matchups when you take into consideration all the matchups that the Bucs are going to be having to deal with. And then Antoine Winfield, maybe not a matchup, but I mean we touched on him earlier. Dude is playing like an all pro, right? I want to read off some stats just to give people perspective since not many are watching the Buccaneers right now. But Winfield on the year, 18 targets, 4 PBUs, a pick, 0 touchdowns allowed, 3 fumbles forced. And he's third among all DBs in passer rating allowed, like 35 passer rating. So it's not just like, oh, he's a really good football player. He's playing really good. No, he is playing like the best safety in the NFL right now. He is wreaking havoc in some of these games. And, he's the reason that the Buccaneers have been able to hang in some of these games, because I mean, obviously last week against the Titans was a 2-score game, but I want to say in the three out of the 4 losses prior, it was all 1-score games, right? Against Houston, Buffalo, and Atlanta, all 1-score opportunities. And Antoine Winfield is the reason they were in every single one of those games. So I think I look to see him having one of those moments where he either picks off Purdy or maybe he gets Debo on a fumble coming across the middle. Something like that to where he's going to have a splash play. He's going to have an impact play. And I know 49ers fans can be a little antsy. So someone's going to have a fumble. Purdy might have a pick. It's going to happen. This is not just exclusive to the 49ers Bucs game. Antoine Winfield has been doing this all year, but I don't want to skirt around it anymore. Jesse. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are going to beat versus this 49ers secondary. Yes. It's going to be ugly, and this might sound a little this might sound a little crazy, but let me fully explain it. I think it'd actually be better for the 49ers to keep Isaiah Oliver in the slot, and I'll tell you exactly why. It's because Chris Godwin is not playing in the slot at the same rate that he has been his entire career. Throughout his first 4, 5, 6 years of his career, played 2/3 of his slots or snaps in the slot, right? He's a pretty slot exclusive guy. This year, he's playing 1/3 of his time in the slot, right? So they're going to keep Mike Evans and Godwin outside. They're going to be the X and the Z of this offense, right? So I think if you're kicking in Diamond or Lenore and you're keeping Ambry Thomas out there, I actually think that's more in the Buccaneers' advantage than it is the 49ers. So I would, if I were Steve Wilkes, only for this game specifically, I would kick Oliver inside, and they'll have some snaps that they'll lose because they have some Bucs have some young guys they're playing in the slot right now. Trey Palmer has been that guy. We mentioned him earlier. Devin Tompkins is their punt returner, a speedy guy. So 2 fast young guys who will get their own. But if you're the 49ers, I'd rather be dealing with that than Mike Evans and Chris Godwin getting targets against Ambry Thomas and Travarius Ward, right? And I don't even think Mooney Ward has been so bad, but him against Mike Evans is not a matchup that favors him. I think Mike Evans is going to get a lot of DPI calls. I think they're going to attack downfield a lot. They're going to attack the sideline a lot. They've done a really good job of that this year. So, yeah, I mean, look, that was the obvious matchup that stood out to me. I think especially the Oliver thing is interesting because I know 49ers fans have been so kind of crazy about that specific matchup and how he's been doing this year. But I actually do think it would benefit the 49ers to keep him on the field and keep Lenore outside.
100% agree with you. And what we saw last week, I think, was a product of Wilkes understanding that Christian Kirk was going to work from the slot most of the game. And being the case, he wanted Lenore in there. I think it was a great adjustment on his part. But I think this is going to be a week-to-week thing, depending on what the matchups are. I look at teams like Philly, where they have 2 great outside receivers. I don't expect Lenore to be kicked inside there. Luckily, Lenore has the versatility to play in or out. And I think this is one of those weeks where Wilkes is going to be smart enough to realize, hey, we don't want Ambry Thomas on an island against either one of those guys. That would be a mistake for the ages. So if we see it, I expect that the Buccaneers will take their chances. And they're going to take their chances either way. That's what this offense does. They're like a boom or bust offense. They were that way with Tom Brady at times. They've been that way with Baker Mayfield. And Baker, what you want to say about him is pretty accurate outside the numbers going deep. I mean, that's one thing that he has done well, at least from what I've seen from him. I don't know what the statistics say, but I got to imagine throwing to guys like Evans makes your job a hell of a lot easier. And that's what Mike Evans does. He gets those one-on-one matchups. He stays tight to the sideline, and he just outjumps you or outruns you, maybe both, and it's a problem. So,
yeah, no, it's definitely going to be a problem if Ambry Thomas sees any time on the field. And I will say, maybe against more experienced offensive coordinators, it would be even more of a problem. But Dave Canales, the Buccaneers offensive coordinator, is a first-time play caller. And I remember he was at the podium last week when we were talking to him, and we were asking him about Mike Vrabel. What was it up, like going up against that sort of defense? And he made kind of this funny comment. He's like, in every single game, I'm outmatched in terms of experience, and it shows. And I think what Canales has done some good things for the Buccaneers. He's certainly modernized their offense in some ways, but I think where he's kind of fallen a little bit short is they don't necessarily take advantage of mismatches where, hey, you have a corner who's bad, we're going to just pepper him over and over and over. Whereas, especially being a 49ers fan, we see this with Kyle so much. If something is working for the 49ers offense, they're going to press that button over and over and over. So I do think if Ambry Thomas plays and he's outside, it's not the end of the world for the 49ers because I'm not sure Canales, he just hasn't proven yet that he's one of those guys that knows what matchups to go
it's wherever Mike Evans is at, that's where they're going to go. So because Baker, I mean, that's his safety blanket, really. He doesn't have the elite tight end. Yeah, they can mix in the screen game, but they're not a great running team. But if Mike Evans is there, they're going to take their chances. I mean, that's just the way that it works.
Yeah, no, and that's the matchup that's going to favor them more than any on offense. They're going to have to, and I don't think it's going to be, you'll see shot plays in there, but it is going to be a lot of short outs, intermediate routes towards the sideline, curls, comebacks, those sort of things, right? So I think Evans is going to get his own against this team. I think Godwin will too. But I'm really interested to see how Steve Wilks approaches the Oliver thing, because Godwin is he's not that slot guy anymore that people think of him, like he was a few years ago. It's just not his role in this offense. So, it'll be interesting to see kind of how Steve Wilks approaches that.
Absolutely. Shady Luke, who's an Eagles fan, says Baker's legs are going to be huge. Bucs got to get pressure all game and protect your edges. Defensive ends and corners. Play press, let Winfield clean up on the back end, and pray. Gotta match the physicality. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's going to take a lot for the Bucs to win. I think there is a small path. Not any given Sunday, right? And I don't think the Bucs are a team where you're just gonna confidently come in and steamroll them, but you should be confident that the 49ers are going to win at the same time. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, we'll certainly see. I think that's a good point about Baker's legs. They use him to kind of move that launch point, play action. And like I was talking about with Dave Canales, he's still learning this offense, and they're getting better over time. But I still think they kind of play a little bit too much into kind of the downfall of what you saw with some of those Seattle teams over the last 5 years, where they run the ball up the middle too much. They're not good at it. They're going to kind of do some of those traditional offensive things that aren't as efficient anymore as they were 5 years ago. So you see some aspects of that, but then you'll see drives where, hey, we're going to pepper Rachaad White 8 times in 3 different ways, running the ball, getting him in the screen game, running outside. So I think for the Buccaneers, this is a good litmus test in terms of, hey, you're very familiar with the 49ers defense, Dave Canales. And, against D'Amico, this offense put up some points, right? So he's proven that, even though it's Steve Wilks, with all the personnel that the 49ers have, this is going to be the defense that he is the most familiar with in terms of all season game planning for. So I do think the Buccaneers will give the 49ers more of a run for their money than fans are expecting. But I think it'll be that sort of thing where the 49ers get out to a lead early, the Buccaneers kind of claw back and make it a closer game than it needs to be, and then the 49ers kind of just run the ball out for the rest of the game.
Yeah, most certainly. GTC Real says, come on, Ben. You know, got dang well that the linebackers can't cover Kittle. Only one that can stop Kittle is Kyle Shanahan. We do know that Kyle Shanahan certainly can stop Kittle for sure.
Oh, man.
Brother Bob says, Ben, you're better than Sheets too. Let me see. Oh, he's got more. Here we go. Ben plus an 8th round pick for PP Sheets and Boombox guy. Oh my gosh. He's trying to trade the whole house over here. I love it. John says Tampa allowed 266 passing yards per game. The 49ers passing attack will destroy Tampa Bay's pass defense. Kittle, Evans, Debo, CMC, and many issues for Tampa. Yeah, the pass defense is not good in Tampa. It's just not good.
No, I mean, like I said, I think Winfield will get one of those plays, but outside of that, it's just bad matchup for the Bucs going against this offense where, Christian McCaffrey can line up outside in the slot, Debo can line up in the backfield. You can do all these different things, and for Kyle, I don't think it's going to be as much as attack this one matchup as what matchup aren't you attacking.
Yeah.
So I think that's really going to be what that game is going to look like.
Pick your poison for sure. Shady Luke says, I think if the Bucs get chunk plays, it'll be on outside routes and crossers with Godwin. Okay, that's a good point. Where the D line for the Niners ain't getting pressure. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say Baker's done a really good job with the quick game this year, right? I think that's where they found success with this offense. They're leaning more and more into that in these last few weeks as it's gotten better. But yeah, I mean, Godwin has been really good on those intermediate routes.
Baker's it's like his thumb or his finger. I know that he hit a helmet this last week. Is he going to be good or what's that looking like?
So he seems to be fine. We'll certainly get a better idea of that over the next few days. But I don't think there's any doubt about him playing. I know his thumb this is actually the second time his thumb has gotten hit this year. I think it happened in week 4 as well. So it's the same thumb. It's just kind of, I don't even think it was so bad last game as much as it got re-aggravated. So it's more just a management thing. Baker seems to be playing well enough with that.
Yeah, most certainly. All right, let's get into it, Ben. I mean, this is what we're all here for. What is your score prediction? Actually, I'll give mine first. So yeah. I think the San Francisco 49ers are definitely going to win this game. I'm basically undefeated when I go to games, so I expect that trend to hang over here. I'm going to be at the game. So I'm going to say the 49ers win 31-20 going away. I think the Buccaneers probably do get a late score to make it look close-ish. I think the spread's around 10.5, which is a big spread for the NFL. Not a betting man, but I do think that the 49ers would cover that spread. 31-20 49ers. What do you think?
Yeah, and I mean, the over-under is 41.5, so they expect this to be a pretty low-scoring game. I expect this to be about a 30-17, 30-14 sort of game. I think, the Bucs always seem to, in these games where they get down, make a late resurgence and go third going into the fourth quarter, they'll have a drive, and then their defense will make a stop, and, they'll look a little frisky. But yeah, I'm predicting 49ers win 30-14. It kind of is what it is. The Buccaneers, like I've said many times, are kind of in a lame duck situation. And, they'd be pretty panicked right now if not for the fact that they won last week, right? Because before that game, they had 4 straight losses. So for the Buccaneers, I actually think it's good for the 49ers that Buccaneers won last week, because otherwise Todd Bowles might be playing for his job this week. And even though I still kind of, at the beginning, like I explained, I see him kind of going on the way out, there's certainly a lot less pressure than they felt over this last month.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, getting a win is very, very helpful. Yeah. Can't blame them. They ran up against the buzzsaw that is CJ Stroud the last month of the season. He's been absolutely incredible, man. What a story he's got going on over in Houston.
Yeah. And, they lost to teams like Atlanta, Buffalo too, where it's like, it's just one possession here or there. And the 49ers are just not one of those teams where you can do that. If you look at the best teams the Bucs have played this year, it's probably the Lions and the Eagles. and they lost to both those teams by 2 touchdowns, and it
Mm.
was a pretty low scoring affair. So I kind of anticipate the same sort of game script.
Yeah, most certainly. Shady Luke says, but the Bucs gotta play so disciplined, y'all. Yeah, they do. Shady, I know that you're hoping the 49ers lose this game. Obviously, being an Eagles fan, there's a good
Okay.
chance the Eagles might lose. I think they're playing Kansas City. So,
They are.
all of a sudden it's only a 1 game difference, and we got that 49ers Eagles game coming up in a couple weeks. Things get really, really interesting. So if the 49ers can somehow lose before that game, it takes a little bit of pressure off. I don't think this is the one, man. I don't think this is the one. Maybe Thanksgiving against Seattle, you can feel a little bit better about that one, but this one is certainly not it. But we'll see. We'll see, Shady Luke. And I think you're right. I mean, I think that they're probably not going to lose either, but any given Sunday, I guess. John says, and Jesse, the 49ers D line, Bosa and Young specifically, might seriously hate Baker. Wilkes might make it a point to get them to get home. And maybe, but I think a lot of that is probably going to have to come from maybe interior pass rush, moving them around, blitzing, because as Ben has talked about, the tackles are actually pretty damn good, especially Wirfs. Very, very good left tackle. The right tackle has been more than serviceable. So it might be a little bit tougher to do that from the edges, but somebody's going to get home, and it'll probably be in the interior. Maybe they put them and go like a NASCAR package or a turbo package and let them rush from the A gaps, and that will help them out as well. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, and I do expect that because the Buccaneers do a lot of chipping on the outside, so they're certainly gonna try to slow down Bosa and Young as much as possible. But yeah, that interior offensive line is awful for the Buccaneers. So they're playing with essentially two backups, and then a guy who was a converted tight end to left tackle in college who's very young. So I think it's going to get pretty ugly for the interior.
Absolutely. Shady Luke says, "No way in hell I have you guys losing, man." Now, I know you don't, but I almost felt like you were trying to talk yourself into it a little bit through the super chats. I could be wrong, but it was like, maybe if this does and then that, and then they have a chance here. I feel like you were trying to talk yourself into it, but as well as I do, it's probably not going to happen. We'll see, though. We'll see. I mean, I've said that a couple of times this year and been
Yeah.
wrong,
No,
so
I
you
mean,
never know.
I will say the one path maybe available to the 40
Yeah.
or to the Buccaneers would be them getting a lot of turnovers on Purdy and them doing a lot of confusing things in terms of that front and doing some different coverages. And Winfield, I mean, I think he's going to get his own, but if they are just able to, Christian Izzian has had 2 picks this year. He's their slot corner. I think there's a game scenario where the Buccaneers at least have this as a 1-score game or a tie game in the fourth quarter. But then again, I'm not quite sure that I trust Baker Mayfield enough. He's been better about the interceptions and not taking sacks. It's the best he's done in his career with it, or you can put it up against his best years. But you kind of still expect him to have one of those plays in one of those situations to where, I just would not be relying on the Buccaneers to close out that game.
Oh, especially, I mean, you've got a defense that is coming off of a major high. They're well rested coming off of a bye as well. I think the formula to success is not there for the Bucs. Yes, I think there is certainly a path, and I agree with you there. It's so small, it's so marginal, and you have to rely on things that haven't necessarily happened to this point, right? We talked about the secondary being an issue. Sure, if Brock Purdy comes out and just lays an egg for whatever reason, maybe, but I don't see that happening. And then, the flip side of that is Baker Mayfield playing a perfect game or damn near perfect. We know who Baker is as well. So,
Right. I will say one way I think the Buccaneers can get after them, which some offenses have done a really good job of, is not going full tempo. But you saw what the Minnesota Vikings did on Monday Night Football. They did kind of that half tempo sort of thing where they didn't allow the 49ers to substitute as much, kind of kept them on their heels, but allowed them to see the full picture of what the 49ers were trying to do. And that's something that Tampa's definitely done a lot more over these last few weeks. Now, I will say, I know I've been talking about a lot, Dave Canales, him being an inexperienced offensive coordinator, not quite sure how much he's going to play into that or as much as he may just stumble into it. Just because, dude, this is his first year play calling, like ever, and, being a coach his entire life, right? So I am kind of curious to see if they'll lean into that. And I will say I think that's one way where the Bucs can have some quick scoring drives and really put the 49ers defense on their heels. But I also
Maybe he does that as a first-time play caller. I mean, think about it. Teams run motion. 49ers in particular run a lot of motion because they want to give the quarterback the answers to the test. Well, if you're a coordinator, doesn't matter if your quarterback's at the line and you go hurry up and kind of play that game and then slow the tempo. You get to see the picture and then you get to talk to your quarterback. I mean, you still are in their helmet until a certain amount of time is left on that play clock. So maybe together you get to see it and you get to talk through it a little bit and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. I would go here, da, da, da. So maybe for a young coordinator, that is a easier way for him to get through the game. And so stumbling upon it might just be the easiest thing for him to do because that's what he's comfortable with.
Yeah, and like I said, they've done a lot more of it. So I do expect to see it. And their offense has been better. They've gotten Rashad White really involved in these last few games. So that's kind of opened up things for Evans and Godwin's a lot more. So, I think it's hard to see the path for the Buccaneers winning, but I think there are certainly scenarios where they make this game more interesting than fans are expecting it to be.
Yeah, most certainly. Randall says, do the Bucs play more cover 3 or 2 or man? Purdy is so much better with cover, or I think he's saying zone versus man.
Yeah, so they're going to be playing zone. That's really what they're going to be like in those kind of drop zone situations. But they'll also mix in a lot of different stuff. Todd Bowles isn't one of those guys where, hey, we're going to play cover 2 the entire game. You're not going to see them play press man. That's just not their game, even though I think fans think these corners should be playing press man. That's just not going to happen. Todd Bowles isn't going to be doing that, but I could see them, definitely mixing in quarters, cover 3, cover 2, doing some different stuff in terms of that. And then they'll mix in some stuff in terms of the numbers on the front, right? So you'll see them use a 5-man front, a 4-man front. You'll see them get the linebackers a little involved here and there, and the slot as well in terms of the pass rush. So there's going to be a lot of different things that Todd Bowles throws at this game, specifically. I think that's where you can kind of catch Brock Purdy on his heels, is changing that picture, post that 15 seconds that Kyle's allowed to be in his ear. I think that's where Todd Bowles is going to want to take advantage. But Purdy is also shown to be really good in those zone situations, right? So I think it's kind of, Buccaneers have to play a certain way because that's how they play. But that doesn't mean that Todd Bowles is going to play the exact same sort of way down to down. That's just not his game.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that is one of the things that the Buccaneers do a good job of, is changing that picture, like you talked about, rolling coverage post snap. But all that is great. But if you don't have the players to keep up, I mean, at some point, your players just aren't good enough to hold their own. And if you can't get home quick and you can't hold coverage on the back end, well, that gives Purdy the time that he needs to make sure that he's seeing things clearly and making good decisions. And more often than not, when he's facing zone, man, that's where he definitely kills it. Shady Luke says, last one, fellas, great content. Thank you, Shady Luke. Thank you to Ben for giving us his time. And Gray Fox says, I went to last year's Bucs game expecting to see a super handsome bowl between Garoppolo and Brady, but I got to see the birth of Brock Purdy, and it was awesome. Go Niners.
That was this game last year, man. You totally forget about that stuff. But yeah, was that his first start, right?
That was his first start, yeah.
Because Jimmy got injured in the Dolphins game.
Yep.
And then, Brock came and finished out that game. But yeah, Purdy's first start. Wow, what a world of difference it is a year ago that time versus now. It's just 49ers are never, ever gonna let us down in terms of content and entertainment. It's good for business.
Yeah, it definitely is. Brother Bob says, clears throat. 49ers 49, Bucs 13. Book it. All right. I love it. Brother Bob, you've been on point a few times this year. I'm not going to lie. You've done a good job with some of those predictions. I hope that you're right on this one. I will be in house. Ben, thank you so much for joining me, man. This was awesome. This was a throwback, a little bit different, but very, very the same, right? We still got to talk 49ers football together. Like I said, very, very proud of you and watching your career progression, seeing you cover the sport as a journalist, going to school for it. It's an awesome thing. nothing but good thoughts and prayers headed your way from me, man. Very, very proud of what you've done. Everybody in the chat, thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, I will be back tomorrow night with Sunil or a call-in show. Haven't figured it out yet. Either way, you guys stay blessed. And until then, peace.